Hi and welcome to The Print. My name is Karanjeet Kaur and I'm a journalist and an editor. Today, I'd like to read you some excerpts from my column on politicians like Brij Bhushan Sharan Singh and Prajwal Revanna who pay for their actions only when they become politically inconvenient. There's a disturbing familiar pattern that binds political figures like Brij Bhushan Sharan Singh and Prajwal Revanna. It goes to the heart of a broader issue of sidestepping serious allegations of sexual harassment and violence until they become just too scandalous to ignore. Let's look at what it took to frame charges of sexual harassment and criminal intimidation against Brij Bhushan Sharan Singh, who is a Bharatiya Janata Party MP and a former Wrestling Federation of India chief. It took 6 well-known, powerful women, 10 years of suffering, plus a year and a half. This also included 4 months of highly public and violent sit-in protests. It took 1 oversight committee, 1 Supreme Court intervention, multiple marches and pleas and letters to Prime Minister Narendra Modi. It took 1 wrestler resigning from the sport altogether and another returning his Padma Shri. It took 22 witness statements, a 1,500-page charge sheet, and a court order that stated that there was sufficient evidence to bring charges against Singh. Eventually, though, it might have all been a matter of political inconvenience. We'll come to that in just a bit. Let's first talk about the uphill battle that India's Olympians have faced to hold their powerful sexual harasser accountable. The fate of the wrestlers is not an isolated incident. It is simply the most public. One of Singh's accusers, the wrestler Vinesh Fogart, stated that the framing of charges sends a strong message that women can take on powerful men and they don't have to be afraid. Now, I have immense respect for the wrestler's satyagraha. But really, what message does it send to Indian women when the mightiest among us have to struggle the way that they have? Is theirs an inspiring or cautionary tale for Indian women in similar situations? Even this sliver of a positive development should have been cause for relief and happiness. But it feels blighted by what happened in the last week. Singh was not given a ticket by the BJP to contest from his home turf of Kaizarganj in Uttar Pradesh. Instead, the party that once couldn't stop talking about dynastic politics handed the ticket over to his son Karan Bhushan Singh. In a recent interview with India Today, the senior Singh seemed very content with the party's decision and spoke about how proud he felt watching his son succeed him. Although last I checked, we were still a parliamentary democracy. Singh asserted, and I quote, "The BJP is still standing by my side. If the party had not given the ticket to my son, then you could have said that the party is not standing by me." Let's unpack this a little. Even after widespread televised national outrage, Singh is confident that the Bharatiya Janata bros have his back. Why wouldn't he be? As the last year and a half have shown, so many networks of power have colluded to shield Singh. This has ensured that his position remains unshaken despite the controversies surrounding him. Almost a year ago, he had loudly proclaimed that he would hang himself if even 1 charge was proven against him. Whether he makes good on that promise or not remains to be seen. But this hyperbolic grandstanding is an example of just how convinced powerful men like Singh are that the results will be in their favor. More than 2,000 kilometers south of Kaizarganj lies Hassan in Karnataka. 2 constituencies divided by language but united in misogynist violence. The Janata Dal secular candidate from Hassan, Prajwal Revanna, is currently in the spotlight as the accused in a ghastly series of crimes against women. These reportedly include rape, coercion, abduction, and videotaping without consent. Revanna's assaults are on a wide spectrum of women, including party workers, constituents, farm and domestic workers, and women who are as old as 68. It is all documented in some 3,000 horrifying videos that have been circulating for months now. Meanwhile, the serial rapist and sexual harasser, allegedly fled to Germany on a diplomatic passport, a day after the Hassan polls. Revanna is a BJP ally. In fact, no less than our Prime Minister campaigned for him. But his predatory behavior did not emerge overnight. The BJP's state unit might have been aware of the extent of Revanna's crimes, and the party still chose to field him from Hassan. But a Congress government has been in charge of the state for a year. Neither party can truly escape responsibility for enabling a context that allowed a predator like Revanna to unleash a reign of terror on women around him. Now that we are witnessing, slack-jawed, the full horror of these crimes, it's all very expedient for the Prime Minister to make comforting noises about punishing Revanna. Still, we cling to fragments of hope. An Interpol Blue Corner notice underscores the international gravity of the case. Factions within the Gowda family have already washed their hands off of him. But here's the thing. Powerful men like Singh and Revanna are held accountable not on the basis of the testimonies of the women that they have harmed, but when it's politically inconvenient. It is only when a Revanna or a Singh threaten to destabilize or dent the authority of other influential men that they are put on the dock. I shouldn't have to explain why this is problematic. But here we are. The pursuit of justice, when it becomes a byproduct of cynical political benefit, is not really justice. It's merely opportunism dressed in the robes of righteousness. The implications for survivors are profound and painful. Women who are forced to take on their violators often find themselves doubly betrayed. First by the institution's initial disregard for their accusations, and then by its failure to support them when their stories are finally acknowledged. When the voices of survivors are amplified or allowed to be amplified only when they are politically useful, it starkly undermines their rights. Either these women are full and equal citizens of India, entitled to justice and respect like the rest of us, or they are not. Yet, there's a perverse clarity in witnessing this blatant misogynistic disregard for the rights of women. It's crucial to see, in all its grim reality, who our political parties and politicians support, and how they value or fail to value the testimonies, the trauma, and the pain of women. Beyond the loud but eventually hollow promises of Nari Shakti campaigns, it strips away any claim, any pretense of moral righteousness. What's left is an unvarnished picture of where women actually stand on the socio-political spectrum. Grappling with the rot at the heart of our political systems that enables men like Revanna and Brijbhushan Sharan Singh is only one aspect of the issue. Bringing them to justice should be just the beginning, not the end. We must also consider what comes next for their accusers. How do they rebuild their lives and careers? How do we ensure their integration and safety? Surely, establishing robust, independent bodies free from political influence to handle such cases can be a start. Maybe then we can begin to believe that justice, however delayed, will be served without prejudice or partiality. It's a novel idea, but maybe it's one worth striving for.